Hey, welcome to Grown. We hope you're doing well today. Is there a certain book in the Bible that you just go back to a lot and that you just enjoy reading? Well, mine is the book of James. I really enjoy reading the book of James, but knowing the background of the book of James, it would be very tough to be in these people's shoes because they were becoming believers and then literally they were being killed for their faith. It's a very people call it practical book, but these people were living a very impractical life. James lays out some very hard things for these folks in the midst of their trials. And even in chapter 1, you're scratching your head going, wow, I can't believe he wrote this to these people after they're running for their life. But when you move on to James chapter 5, he talks about being patient. And man, he really just strikes me where I sit because of what he says about being patient. Now remember, these people are running for their lives, and he's telling them about being patient for the Lord. You know, Job is sitting around a fire, and he's going through all of his trials and lost his kids and his family and his livestock and his servants. And I'm sure he's looking at a fire. And if you've ever just sat around a fire and in the stillness of that moment, and you're watching the sparks fly up, I want you to remember this verse that Job said in Job chapter 5, verse 7. He said, "Yet a man is born into trouble as the sparks fly upward." He said, just like these sparks in that fire fly upward, he said, you're going to have trouble. Your days are going to be filled with trouble. Some of you more than others, but everybody is going to go through trouble in their life. Now, in retrospect, James talking about the trouble that these people are going through and running for their life because they received Jesus Christ as their Savior. And he tells them to be patient. In fact, a couple times he tells them to be patient. In fact, in chapter 1, verse 3, he says, I want you to be patient in your circumstances. No matter what circumstance you in, I want you to be patient. And then in James chapter 5, verse 7 that we're going to look at today, he says, I want you to be patient with other people. He gives different scenarios to be patient. He uses a different word. But ultimately, he is talking about, when he's saying be patient, he's talking about being long-tempered. You see the stick of dynamite of the picture I have on the screen here. Now, I don't know about you. I've never messed with dynamite before, and it would be something I have no idea what I would be doing. But I know this. I would want the longest fuse I possibly could have if I'm the one lighting it and I'm the one running away from it. And James is simply saying this. You need to have a long fuse, being long-tempered. And so God is giving some requirements of why we need to have a long fuse when it comes to our patience. And James says this in 5:7. He says, be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. He says, you know why you need to be patient? He's because Jesus Christ is getting ready to come back soon. He says, you're like that farmer waiting for that precious fruit to come in. Sometimes it takes months. He said, but be patient, be long-tempered, stay in the faith, because Jesus is standing at the door, knocking. You know, the First Peter says this, but the end of all things is at hand. I know we've been hearing the preaching for a long time that the rapture is coming. Jesus is establishing his kingdom. But I think more than ever, we can really see that happening. And he says, be patient, for Christ is coming back soon. And then he says, complain not against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth at the door and knocks. He says, look, complaining against one another is going to be very tempting to do. And it is tempting to do. Especially in a stressful situation, you're going to tend to blame shift and point fingers and tell why this person is at fault. And you can imagine the people there as they're running from their homes and they're uncomfortable. They're probably not bathing like they did. They're wearing the same clothes, and they begin to gripe amongst one another. And you know, in your situation, when those things happen, you begin to complain against one another when your situation is not the best. He said, so you don't want to sin. He said, also, don't worry because Christ is getting ready to come back soon. But another reason to be patient is look at the examples that have been set before us. He said, look at Moses as he endured most likely 1 million rebellious people. Look at David as he was being hunted by Saul. Look at Elijah as he was running from Jezebel, or Jezebel sought to kill him, and how he stood up. And Jeremiah was persecuted, but yet he didn't complain. Look at Ezekiel, suffered the loss of his wife by God as an example. There's people that's gone on before us that have endured a lot more than we have endured. And then he says, remember this, the blessings of God. Behold, we count them happy which endure. I want you to listen to this quote, maybe type it out, write it down, or memorize it. Blessings do not come to people who do great things, but who have endured great things. Blessings do not come to people who do great things, but who have endured great things. I tell my kids all the time, there's nothing like living out an example. You know, we can tell people what to do, but until they live that out, they really don't know what it's like to suffer or go through that trial. You know, there's an eternal reward for suffering here on this earth. And lastly, realize that God has a purpose in this trial that you're going through. So we need to remain patient. He says, if you have heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the purpose of the Lord's dealings, know this, in good times we only just know about God by what we hear, but we don't truly grasp his purpose. But in the hard times, we know God because we experienced him and we've lived out his purpose. The reason you know who God is simply this. It's because you lived it out. And you were started out as that grain of that small mustard seed of faith, but you grew into a large tree, a mustard tree. So why do we have to be patient when we're going through trials? Because Christ is getting ready to come back, and I'm excited for that. And also, we don't want to be caught in sin and complaining against one another. And we need to look at the other examples that are around us here in this life, and also the prophets that have gone on before us. And remember that God is the one that's doing the blessing. And as his children, he has our best at heart. And then realize that God has a purpose for the suffering that you're going through. Our dynamite fuse should be long. Sometimes it's not, and we have to ask for forgiveness for that. But look at the book of James and see how he spells it out about how we should be patient. God bless you. We hope you have a good day.